Today is Friday, February 11th, 2011, and my name is MROHP. I am interviewing Lynne Wegley, who is the current president of the League of Women Voters of Boulder County. She also was president between 1989 and 1991. This interview is being recorded for the Maria Rogers Oral History Program. The interview is being filmed by Emily Schuster. Lynne, my first question to you will be to ask you when and where you were born.
I was born September 11th, 1941 in Detroit, Michigan.
Following up with that, is there anything in your background that led you to become interested in the work of the League, or to become a member of the League of Women Voters?
I think initially I became a member because I was a young mother, home with young children. I have an educational background in political science, and Boulder city government was very, very interesting to watch. And that led me to the League of Women Voters because that was my area of interest, and there was so much going on in the city that I wanted to get involved in and know more about.
So when you were growing up, did you grow up in Michigan?
No, actually, I came to Colorado when I was 5 years old. It was right at the end of World War II, and my parents were headed for Arizona. And they ran out of gas rations in Colorado. So we ended up in Colorado, and I've been here ever since.
That's a great story. When you run out of gas, stay in place, huh?
Right, right.
Okay, so did you actually grow up in Boulder?
No, I grew up in Jefferson County, and then I came to Boulder to attend CU, and I married a Boulder boy, and we lived in Boulder for 36 years, and then moved to Longmont.
Okay. Well, were any relatives active in civic life or politics?
Not really. I seem to be a lone ranger in my family in this area of interest, but I've made my career in city government, and always been involved in the League for the most part.
Okay, well, we'll get back to your career in a little bit. So you are really, I guess, we'd have to say you're almost really a Colorado native. So
right.
That is interesting. And you're also a graduate of the University of Colorado. So you spoke a little bit about getting involved with the League because of how interesting Boulder city government was. Mm-hmm. Could you expand on that a bit, of how that involvement kind of grew?
I joined, I think, initially the schools committee because obviously I had young children that were going to be starting school pretty soon, and through that process really learned a lot. And I think that was an attraction for a lot of people. There were a lot of people my age in the League at that point in time, and I was just so impressed with the older Leaguers. They were full of knowledge and experience and were doing incredible things. So I think probably the first few years I was just in absolute awe of them.
And when was this approximately?
The early 70s.
There was a lot going on in
Right.
Boulder in the early 70s, as there was all over the country, but that's kind of a critical time for Boulder.
Right.
And the presence of the League. Can you tell us, like at that time, like you said you were so impressed, do you have memories of the women that you were impressed with, or what projects they were working on?
There were a number of them. Liz Hawkins was invaluable. I think she's left Boulder in the last few years. Janet Roberts, I'm sure you've heard about, Ruth Carell, all very, very important in the history of Boulder. And there was so much going on at that time. We were really interested in Rocky Flats. It was an active nuclear facility at that point in time. And there was a lot of picketing going on to have it closed and decommissioned. Hazardous waste and waste disposal and recycling are sort of commonplace now, but they were just happening then. And so people were very, very interested in those things. Open space was just starting as a new concept. And we wanted basically to protect the boundaries of Boulder so it didn't become a contiguous city with someone else. But in that process, I know Carolyn Holmberg, who has since passed on, got her background as far as open space goes in the league, and then went on to become director of Boulder County Open Space. But she was a former league member. That's where she did her study and got information about it. She was also a former president. So there was a lot happening at that time. I was in Boulder when there was a huge sit-down regarding the Vietnam War on the 28th Street Viaduct. So very, very interesting period of time.
And so it really pulled you in between both the other members and just
Everything
the issues.
going on, right.
All of that was really, really pulled you in.
Right.
What have been your particular issues or particular interests during the time span?
Probably my primary interest is good government. So I've been interested in government at both the city and the county level. One of the issues that we saw in the 70s and 80s, and it's still hanging out there today, is the number of county commissioners. Right now we have 3. It's been proposed for probably the last 30 years to have 5. We've talked about having a county manager as opposed to having county commissioners. And the city government was extremely interesting. There were a lot of individuals over history on the city council and a lot of different agendas.
And so can you describe also, when you said you were interested in governance, can you describe sort of what league positions are on good governance or what they've been in Boulder?
Well, we do have a position on Boulder City Council and its makeup. We do not have that on the other Boulder County cities, and that's something that we've recently proposed that we study. So I'm hoping we see a study of that next year. But some of the principles that we're looking for in good government is well-managed fiscal policies, transparency, openness. We want citizen involvement, and obviously you see that at every step in the Boulder city and county government. And the league has been on a number of planning commissions throughout the years trying to help mold those policies.
Wow. Well, one of your roles, aside from being a member who worked on probably study groups and went to various meetings and worked in the consensus process, you also were willing to be co-president, and now you're willing to be president. Can you tell us something of your experience as president?
Well, co-president, at that time I was working full-time and my co-presidents were working full-time, and so it was a new concept that we brought into league because everybody had time constraints. And I can't remember at this point in time how we split the responsibilities, but we got it done, and I think there was a 3 to 4 year period where we had co-presidents. And then I'm not sure quite when it happened, but the presidency was always a 2-year term, and they changed that to 1 year, I think, to attract people as well. Although I think most people go on to do a second year. But issues that the president faces is obviously communication with the other members, knowing what's going on with both the national and state leagues, which are very important because we use all of their positions as well as our own whenever we're taking action. And often there's issues that we're extremely interested in a local league that pushes the National League to take action, because they are responsible for doing the lobbying at the national level. So the president is really trying to keep a finger on everything that's going on in the league, and quite honestly, there's so much commitment and so many good people that it's just sort of keeping track of everything that's going on because somebody else is doing a whole lot of the work for you.
So you're truly more in a facilitation role than micromanaging or trying to get a lot of the jobs done. There's just tremendous participation.
Yeah, and I have seen from, when I was first president to now, a huge difference in that we've gone from just reams and reams of paper to everything's electronic now. I get much fewer phone calls because we do everything with email. So that's really changed. And the makeup of our membership has changed as well. We've gotten much older. The people who I originally joined the league with, so many of them are still in the league, but we're all, 20, 30 years older. And we don't see a lot of younger women joining, primarily because women are working outside the home now, I think, and they have limited time and resources to do everything. So in terms of membership recruitment, we tend to draw from newly retired people as opposed to the 30 and 40-year-old age group.
Does that change how the organization works or how it operates to have your pool of new members coming from, say, a post-60 age group? Or
it concerns us in that we would like more of the younger generation, and we do know that the best way to reach them is with new technology, so we're constantly working on that. But on the other hand, newly retired people come out of the workforce with a lot of great skills as well. So there's also that benefit. They've been out working, managing, and so they're fairly efficient and sharp and ready to go and looking for something new to do.
Yeah, so there's change and there's possibilities in that change, and then there's perhaps some other yearnings to have a younger membership as well.
Right.
Well, good. Since you brought up the topic, it was actually one of the ones I wanted to bring up. Do you, for the most part, see the benefits of this modern technology for organizations like the League?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, I mean, it's the way our country moves and works today, and we need to be in touch with it. And the National League has blogs and is on Facebook, and that's something that we're currently investigating locally so that we can reach out to people in those ways.
Okay, so you'll have your Facebook page and maybe a few tweets or something when you're at the council meetings or whatever, letting people know what's happening. So yeah, that's one thing. Another person that I've interviewed has really mentioned is one of the big changes that she really experienced was sort of the communications revolution for voluntary organizations and what that has meant. So that's interesting. Not all those hours on the phone any longer.
Right. We get very few phone calls now, but we get lots of emails. So.
Right, but do you still have your unit meetings, which are
Right.
face to face, right? So there's still the personal contact as well.
Right, and that's very important to the Boulder members. We used to have 2 units a month. We're down to 1 now. But there are leagues across the country who no longer have units. They've found other ways to communicate and share information, and sometimes have general meetings or, dinners or that type of thing. But the Boulder League holds the unit meeting very dear, and I don't think they would be willing to give it up. And it's a great way to exchange information.
Right, and I think maybe it's a way of maintaining community too, right?
Right.
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 That's good. Well, that's interesting that some have actually gone to the point of like ending unit
Right.
meetings. Okay, well that's definitely part of your precious organizational culture. So you were president, and you were president while you were actually had a full-time job.
Right.
And I'm wondering, did the league at all influence your work or your choice of career?
I'm not really sure, because that was just always an interest of mine.
And what was your work again?
I was in city government.
Okay.
And while I was in league, once my children started school, I went back to graduate school and got my master's in public administration. And I was definitely, my goal was to work in city government. So I felt fortunate that I was able to do that.
Did you ever find that the skills of doing the studies also helped with your approach to graduate school or government?
I'm not too sure about that, but I know in doing any type of public outreach, I always thought of the league first as one of the organizations to contact when I was doing, city projects. And we were using boards or committees. They were always one of the first people I would invite on my list to help with that. For example, I was a project manager for developing the City of Longmont's Water Conservation Master Plan, and we invited a league member to participate in that. So we always had that connection between, the community and the city government. And I saw league members come to the water board meetings, and we had a league observer city council meetings who we all knew. So there was definitely that association there.
Right, so even when you weren't in the league, somehow there was always a league presence
Right.
for you too.
Right.
That's great. So, it sounds like obviously civic affairs has been a real paramount issue, whether it's in your career or
Right.
in your volunteer work.
Right.
Yeah. I also wanted to ask you a little bit about, since you are the president, about stepping back a little bit and just telling us something about how you see a League of Women Voters like working in the community. Like, what is the mission and what you see as the important jobs that the League does, or the important work that it provides?
Well,
in the
clearly,
community?
League has a long history of doing their homework and doing studies and then developing positions that we work on. So any action that we take is based on those positions. But I see the League's role. Actually, we have 2 missions. One is to educate people, and then the other is to take action. So our educational piece is totally nonpartisan, and is really to show the pro and con side of all issues and encourage people to be informed voters when they go to the polls or participate in their government. The other part, the action part, is really to use those positions to take action. And I think it's very important that as a league we're visible in our community, that people know who we are, that we maintain our reputation. As you know, we built that up over 90 years, and that's very important to us. So we're always very careful in any positions we take that they represent what we've adopted at either the local, state, or national level. But I think it's very important that the League's involved in all issues within the community and that we're visible. And we try to do that visibility by having observer corps and writing letters to the editor and showing up at important board meetings and letting people hear our voice.
Okay, so there you have it. I've been thinking about another question for the League and League members, and I was wondering if today you were to speak to, say, an 18-year-old that was about to become officially, an active citizen who was able to participate, what might you say to that young person about citizenship and how the League sees citizenship?
Well, as a citizen, I think you have a responsibility in a democracy to participate, and the laws, the policies that happen in this country are going to directly affect your life, and you should certainly have a say in what those are going to be and how they're molded, and feel free to voice your opinions to your representatives and your legislators. And because remember, you're helping create the world that you're going to live in and raise a family in. And the League can help provide a lot of background and education in that area.
And of course, the League's history was sort of the preparation of women after the vote
Right.
to be active citizens.
Right.
So, yeah, well, just know that the League strongly, obviously, participates in democracy.
Mm-hmm.
So, kind of wondered what you would tell a young person today, because there seems to be a lot of apathy around involvement in a lot of different kinds of politics. So,
And I saw that apathy for a long time, but in some of the younger generation, and particularly in the last national election, there was so much enthusiasm among the youth, and that was truly exciting to me. And at the time, I was doing some work with campaigns, and there were young people working on those campaigns who had actually taken a semester off from, for example, CU to do that. And that type of enthusiasm was very exciting for me to see. And I hope that maintains. That.
Well, things always are undergoing change, and hopefully we'll continue or revamp that enthusiasm over time. When you have, you've talked about membership a little bit, do you have active campaign to bring in new membership, and is there a way that you have of reaching out, and is there a way that you see the League takes to sustain membership?
I can remember when we used to have membership meetings, and people brought friends to those meetings, and we fairly actively recruited. And we also had orientations for all our members. I can remember inviting new members to my home and explaining how the League worked and everything. That seems to have fallen off somewhat, but the National League has begun a membership initiative, and they've set up a training corps and trained these people, and it's sort of the trainer trains the trainer. And I think this is probably the second go-around will be starting this year. So I'm really hoping that our Boulder League will get involved in that. We started talking about it on the board, and our membership chair is very interested in doing that. And they're coming up with new ideas how to recruit in a different time and attract the type of members who would be interested. So I think it sort of fell off for a while, and we're starting to bring that back and looking for new ways and creative ways to attract people into the organization.
Oh, good. Another aspect of the League is that it is primarily a women's organization, and there's all that history with it. And I was wondering if you could comment on the League as a women's organization and how, from your experience from the 1970s on, the League has perhaps affected women's participation or in politics or in government.
It is probably primarily a women's organization, but I can't remember the date, but we do have male members now.
I think it was 1974, reading that history.
I know it was sometime in the 70s, and we actually have a man on the national board, which I think is great. But in terms of women entering politics, I think it gave people a background, it gave them a sense of self-confidence to pursue those type of things. You know, the first women who started the Boulder League started it because they were concerned about the pasteurization of milk. And they were just a group of homemakers, and they, since that point in time, Leaguers have developed a lot of skills, and it has given them the encouragement and the confidence to move into the public sector, and particularly into elected offices. And we've certainly had a number of people in elected offices come from our league, as well as other leagues across the country. And I really think it developed that self-confidence and to go on further and help people develop the contacts they needed to help them get there.
What is the League's view, so women, their involvement in government, and kind of giving them that training and so forth. So probably one of your big, or maybe it's unspoken, I don't know, goals is also perhaps mentoring other women in terms of becoming leaders. Is that part of something?
You know, it's never been a spoken thing, but I think just the experience and the encouragement and the support would certainly be there.
Have you ever experienced any mentoring?
Within the league, I would say not one-on-one, but certainly some of the members that I really respected, absolutely. And I think it happens unconsciously. You know, there's been people who have devoted their lives to the league practically. Like, I don't know if the name Tess McNulty has come up before, but she was originally from the Washington, D.C. area. She came out to Colorado, became very involved in the water community, and is well known throughout the state for her expertise. And when professionally I worked in the water industry, and her name came up often at meetings, particularly when we wanted to put a publication together or something that we involved Tess in it because of her reputation. So someone like that has an impression on you for sure, and all her experiences throughout the years. And you know, she lobbied at the legislature, and she wrote booklets, and was on local boards.
I also read in your history that she got an award from Governor Romer, so she really was recognized.
Yeah,
a recognized commodity. Yeah. And of course, there's always, you know, Janet Roberts that people talk about, and and their tremendous role in shaping Boulder's, you know, community and history. So.
Yeah, I think Janet may have been one of the original members of the league, and she was active her entire life. So,
So in regard to mentoring, it's more of a communal, like it's as a community that you support each other.
Right.
And so it's not necessarily one person taking the lead, but rather all of you cooperating with each other and learning from each other, and then having a few outstanding women that are very successful and say, you know, we can do it. I wanted to also ask you, in terms of your involvement with the League, just now from your sort of perspective, now you're currently president and can look back probably on a long history now of the League. What do you think have been some of the major accomplishments of the League?
I think in terms of voter rights, the League has made huge accomplishments in making the access to voting possible and providing information so that people are informed when they go to the polls. I think that's huge. And that's something that we will continue to do, I think, always. That's very, very important to us. So, you know, we have candidate forums, we put out publications on ballot issues, and we also lobby at every level. We have a state lobby corps that lobbies the state legislature. We have paid lobbyists at the national level, and we're obviously lobbying local officials. We try to get to know our elected officials and keep that connection there. I think that's a really important aspect of League. That's something that's very important to all of us. Obviously, that's on the educational side. I do think we've influenced a lot of policies. You know, very, very active with Rocky Flats when they were going through all their changes. Both the Jeffco League and the Boulder League were active. And very active in solid waste and recycling and that type of thing. And I think I mentioned open space before, but that was a big issue for us. So I think we've had a big influence in a lot of areas. Always closely watched the schools and evaluated their policies and where they're going.
Could you expand a little bit on Rocky Flats and what the League did in relation to Rocky Flats?
I'm trying to remember. There was a Rocky Flats committee, board, citizen advisory committee, and members of the League were active on that. There was obviously a lot of concern because of the nuclear waste out there, and that committee helped to reach the point where they actually closed it down. So we've always worked through the proper chains and tried to maintain a respectful dialogue and at the same time express our viewpoints.
So that's sort of an interesting tension to maintain. Being both open and yet having a position. So that's an interesting tension for this organization to maintain, but one
if we
critical.
see issues we would like to address and we don't have positions on them, then our members will usually propose a new study on those, and we will study them so that we have a position the next time. For example, when we had the recent wildfires up above Boulder, and they were coming down into the city of Boulder, and you know the potential there. There's been a lot of discussion on who should be paying for all the firefighting efforts that went into that, because it's basically Boulder County land. Does Boulder County pick up all of that? And there were discussions going on. Well, we don't have a position on that. So that's a proposed study for next year, is to define in terms of natural disasters where the financial responsibility and sharing belongs. And that's something that our local league proposed. We will take it to our annual meeting for adoption, but I think that's probably something that we'll start to study next year. So when we don't have a position, we're saying we should be addressing that, and we have no position to address it with. And so then we will undertake a study and try to come to a consensus.
That's really interesting, and obviously just so you tend to want to be responsive to events as they unfold, as well as having sort of a continuous program around education, which probably aspects of it do change, but still a traditional commitment to that. I was also curious about one thing you said about one of the great accomplishments of the League when you talked about access to voting. I was wondering what you meant by that.
Well, I mean, we assume everybody over 18 can vote, but it's not always that easy. And there's proposals, for example, that you have to have a photo ID or you have to have certain identification. But in fact, there's people who don't have birth certificates in this country who are citizens, and it's been very difficult for them to vote. And there's been many minority populations that have had a difficult time getting registered and voting. So one of the great things, I think, is the motor voter registration, so you can register at the same time that you get your driver's license. Well, I can't remember when that came in, but it hasn't always been there.
Yeah, right. But it was while you were a member that it happened.
Yeah. And that's something that we're always watching for, and there's a lot of proposals coming out now for photo IDs, and the League doesn't really support that because it puts up fences and roadblocks for people to actually be able to vote. And we want everybody to have the right to vote that is legally qualified to do so. So that's something that's constantly monitored.
That is very interesting, I think,
And
to look at that issue.
And there's a lot of concerns around technology. You know, there was a lot about going to voting machines with no paper backups. And we have a lot of concern about that. You know, we want there to be a trail and transparency to when people do vote. So when there's issues or they need to recount, that we can. And those have been issues in the past. So that's something we're always watching.
Is there actually, they're called interest, is there an interest group that is actually labeled, I don't know, voting or good governance or?
We don't have one at the local level. I'm sure there are at many leagues. You know, everybody sort of picks and chooses what they're going to work on based on limited manpower and that type of thing. But it's something that we always watch, and we do have positions that we can act on. So if something comes up at our legislature, our lobby quarters are there, you know, lobbying based on our positions.
And so the lobbying corps responds from all the counties, all the league counties in the state?
Actually, at the state level, there's a legislative action committee, and those are the people that lobby. We have one paid lobbyist at the state, and then who obviously can't do everything. And then we have the Legislative Action Committee, who are people from all the different leagues within the state who have an interest in that. And actually, the person who directs that is from our Boulder League. But they watch the legislation and they choose subjects because clearly that's the only way you can get it, you know, covered entirely, and put out a legislative action letter every 2 weeks or every week, and so that the members can check and see what the status of every piece of legislation that's being proposed is.
And so the communication is a two-way street from the state to the locals, but the locals also provide some feedback.
Manpower.
Oh,
Yeah.
so that everyone comes to unity on how they might stand on a particular bill.
We will support, oppose, or watch the bill, and that's based on our existing positions.
And as president, probably you're one of the people that has to keep track of some of these things more, huh?
Well, I try to know what's going on at the state legislature and what our positions are on bills coming out. I can't say I'm fluent in every one of them, but I try to watch them all.
Right, and then kind of maybe people in the local league here, Boulder County, rely maybe a little bit on you to, I don't know, convey information or stand for whatever Boulder's positions are.
I think probably their greatest reliance is on the legislative letter. They can subscribe to that, or they can go online to the state website and read it every week. And that's going to be the most current for them. And if they're particularly interested in an issue, that's where they're going to go. And the state committee and legislative hearings, et cetera, are all on TV now. So if somebody's very interested, they can watch it on TV. And it's also streamed on the computers. So it's the availability and access to watch what's actually happening is much greater than it's ever been before. You don't have to go down to the state legislature now to watch it.
That in itself is a huge change if you take advantage of that, whatever, transparency, that visibility.
Right.
And even knowing that you can really do work like that and be aware of it. Looking back, at your involvement also, are there things that the league did or didn't do, or that you would have liked to have changed in some way?
Nothing's really jumping out at me. I'm always amazed at how consistently I agree with the league positions. There's a few things sometimes we have issues with. For example, at the local level, we're very, very interested in the Fair Elections Now Act. And we have been pushing national league.
That's a state law?
That is a national law.
National, okay.
And we have been pushing the National League to take greater action on that. And they have really concentrated more on the Disclosure Act at this point in time, and they're both about publicly financed campaigns, and which comes from the recent Supreme Court decision that said that you can get all the funds you want from all these different sources, and there's no transparency at all. And we saw that in our last state election. There were huge amounts of money that came in, and we don't even know where they came from. So there's been some discontent at the local level that National has not taken more action on the Fair Elections Now Act. We have lobbied at the National League, to do that for a couple of years now, and they don't think it has a very good chance of passing, so they've concentrated their efforts elsewhere. So sometimes we run into those type of things where we feel really strongly about a position locally, and when it comes to lobbying at the national level, it has to be done by the National League. We cannot directly lobby our representatives. So that's been a source of frustration for us. But You know, I tend to agree with almost all the positions that we take. So.
And obviously after having a few years of non-activity in the league and then coming back and becoming president, obviously speaks to a huge commitment on your part to the league and coming back with all your experience too in government. I was wondering if you have any anecdotes or stories that you would like to share about, I don't know, things that have happened in the league that impressed you about certain people, about any experiences, say, with the government that you interacted with, you know, the Boulder governments, the county governments or the city government. Any stories about those interactions or?
Oh, I can't think of any specifically. I mean, there's always funny things that happen, and you'll be in public meetings, or you'll be on a TV interview, and you run into interesting people, but I can't really think of anything specifically.
Okay.
Could I ask one question really quick?
Oh,
Sure.
wonderful.
This is something maybe that you would have a unique perspective on because you're the current president, obviously, of the league. What do you imagine, or what do you foresee the league doing and appearing in, you know, the next 5 years, 10 years, even further into the future, just both, you know, generally and in terms of specific issues or anything really?
You know, I hope that we are keeping current all the time, that we're anticipating issues, and that we're always on top of them and ready to respond. You know, some of the biggies nationally are like climate change and a lot that's happening internationally, and there's been studies proposed to look at a lot of financial issues, which get into a lot of difficult areas. One of the things that we approved for the National League to study was the role of the national government in education, because that's something that's always been held dear to people at the local level. So what is the role? And so that's something we're studying now. And we're also starting a study on privatization. And, you know, that's sort of the contracting out of services, because obviously the government can't do everything, and what type of guidelines should be in place so that we can address those.
Federal level and
well, it's on a federal level, which I think is appropriate and where it belongs, because once the federal league takes a position, then we can use that position too. So once there, for example, there are positions on privatization, we can roll those down to the local level,
right,
where we see that happening on the local level.
Yeah, but so I guess you're interested in looking at how the government uses private entities in terms of the federal government and at the local level?
Both.
Or internationally?
We'd like to see guidelines in place.
Okay.
Principles that we think should always be followed. You know, whether it's sending everything out for quotes and the basis for evaluation, not necessarily just on price alone. But we've all heard horror stories, obviously, and I know working in city government, we did a lot of privatization, and it takes a certain amount of management to get what you want and to get your value, you know. So it'd be nice to have some principles set in place and some positions that we could work on there.
Yeah.
But there's going to be all sorts of interesting things coming up, particularly as technology moves forward. I keep wondering what our world's going to look like in another 20 years. So, And you don't, you sort of go along with things because it's always happening in your life. And when we started talking about this project, I started thinking about what was going on in the 70s. And then you realize how much has really changed and how our thought processes have changed and how we approach things, in our society. And how people communicate now, huge. I can remember when I first started working, we had word processors, and then we had computers, and I had a really hard time getting administrative staffs to be willing to start doing things on computers. They were typing things with 5 or 6 copies and erasing them. So that's really changed people's work styles, so that sometimes they wordsmith documents to death, but at least they have the ability to do that. So what's it going to look like in another 20 years? So I hope that we can anticipate well enough to be able to respond to those.
Yeah, and in terms of the theme of the League, hopefully that technology will be fit inside a democratic culture, or will be part of a democratic culture.
Right.
Great. Well, I think one of the closing questions that we usually ask is, how has the League changed you as a person?
For many, many years, it's a very important part of my life. And I think it's the ability to interact with so many women that you really respect. And one of the things that concerns the League greatly right now is the lack of civil discourse in our politics. Mm-hmm. And I think the unfortunate shooting in Arizona has brought that up a little bit more, and I was pleased to see the political parties at the State of the Union mixing a little bit. But that's always been a principle of the League, so there's a lot of civility and a lot of respect for our members and among our members. And I think I've always enjoyed that, plus the fact that you have the opportunity to just learn so much. And I tried political activity and found that it just didn't fit like the League fits. Yeah, I like the idea of being nonpartisan and really looking at issues and examining them and finding out what's going on and not just following the party line. Sometimes the party was doing things I totally disagreed with, even though I might, believe most of their philosophy. And I tend to agree with most of what the League does. So it feels like a good fit, and you meet some great people and learn at the same time.
Right. And at the same time, you're a fully engaged citizen.
Right.
And a real participant in democracy.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah.
How are we doing on time?
We have a few more minutes.
Okay. Are you feeling as though you'd like to add anything at this point, or are you more or less finished?
I think I'm finished unless there's some burning questions that have come up.
Well, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you.
It gives us another inside view of the League and Boulder's history.
Mm-hmm.